How is everybody this morning? Very good. So, sadly, not quite met Jeffrey yet, but it's one off the bucket list. Okay, let's get some pleasantries out of the way. Aaron got it right. My name is Luke Downing. This is Lessons from the Laravel Framework. First things first. Wow, he's a lot shorter in real life, hey? And my mum was always like, oh, you're going to be 6'2", just like your granddad. Turns out my granddad was never 6'2", that was a lie. So 5'8" it is, you're going to have to put up with it. As Aaron has said, I don't actually work for anybody in the UK, which is where I'm from. I'm actually from a little island just off the top of Scotland. It rains 366 days of the year. There aren't many people who live there either, but we have fiber broadband. And actually, when you think about it, it's just the perfect place for developers because there's no reason to go outside. No excuse to talk to anybody, and you've still got fast internet. So feel free to move there whenever you'd like. As I said, Jeffrey, my boss, he works all the way over in Florida. And he owns that little company for the last decade or so called Laracon. Anybody heard of Laracasts? Yeah, right. It's like Netflix, but it's got stuff on there you actually want to watch. I think I speak for many of us when I say that I learned more or less everything I know about Laravel and the framework and the extended tool set watching Jeffrey on Laracon. And now for some unfathomable reason, I have the privilege of being able to sit, metaphorically speaking, next to Jeffrey and teach you what I know about Laravel and the framework and the ecosystem. So because I'm an egotistical maniac, how many of you have seen one of my videos? All three of you. Thank you. Thanks for the support. No, it is crazy. It is crazy to think. I'm going to tell you a little anecdote. This goes no further than Laracon US. It wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things. I was tasked with plugging maybe 5,000, 6,000 coordinates from a JSON file into the Google Maps JavaScript SDK. Yay. And I whipped up a for loop and did what the documentation said. And sure enough, 5,000, 6,000 pins appear. But all the pins are in the middle of the ocean. Now, if you're from the UK, that can only mean one thing. You've got the latitude and the longitude the wrong way around. Yeah. Easy mistake to make. We're developers. The problem was with my little solution to that because I didn't go into the for loop and change the order of the variables. Or I didn't use my powerful IDE to select one column and move it across in the JSON file. No, I decided the best way to solve that was to go through that file line by line, by hand, and manually change all the latitudes over to the longitudes. And if not for the fact that my boss at the time came up behind me and said, Luke, what are you doing? Just change the variables. I would probably still be doing that job today. Still be moving those variables across. And now I imagine some of you watch my content on Laracast and you go, yeah, he knows what he's talking about. Could not be further from the truth. Well, that's called imposter syndrome. Hits pretty hard when you teach. So to try and work through that, I often do a little retrospective, right? How is it that I've gone from not even understanding you can change the order of two variables to being able to somewhat confidently teach alongside people like Jeffrey Way? And the answer, when you actually kind of boil it down, always comes back to Laravel, right? Laravel was the first framework to teach me what it really means to be a programmer. Before Laravel, let's say one of those TikTok influencers had approached me in the street. Hey, love your Toyota Camry. What do you do for a living, you know? I write code for a living. You said that before? I write code for a living. Laravel debunks that as a myth, a half-truth, right out of the box with one of these. Now, just in case you've paid hundreds of dollars to attend Laracon US and you don't know what these are, it's my honor to be able to introduce you. This is a 3-line comment. You'll find them everywhere in the Laravel code base. They're always 3 lines long. Each line is always 3 characters less than the line before, apart from the period at the end there, which we will let Taylor off for. And we love to talk about them. In fact, you cannot shut Laravel developers up when it comes to 3-line comments. And what happens when you proudly march over, perhaps to one of those Node.js developers that have infiltrated the conference this year, and you say, have you seen our 3-line comments? Right? They look at you gone out. They look at you like you've lost your mind. And can you blame them? What are you talking about a comment for? Who cares about a comment? Does the PHP binary stand there handing out gold coins to Taylor every time he writes one? Would explain the Lamborghini, wouldn't it? But no. Doesn't care. Skips right over the comment. What about senior Laravel developers? Because we can't stop talking about them. But you've read the content of that comment hundreds, thousands of times, right? So when you come across it in the code base, what do? You stroll right past. As for the juniors, they'll read that. The juniors, they read the comment and they do benefit, right? They learn about the Laravel framework, how it's put together, how to write applications. But they don't notice the formatting because they're so intent on what it actually says, how it works. It's only much later down the line when they're senior developers and they go, oh, wow, you seen how that comment is like, nice, 3 lines? But by that time, they've read it hundreds, thousands of times. What do? They scroll right past. There's a very, 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 very small percentage of the community that legitimately benefit from a 3-line comment. If that comment was 4 lines long, 5 lines long, if each line was slightly different in length, guess what? We wouldn't care. We wouldn't know any better. It'd be like every other framework out there. And yet, I'm willing to bet, if I asked the room, took a poll, do you think it's worth spending 10, 15 minutes to choose the words and the sentence structure and the punctuation necessary to build a 3-line comment? You would say yes, and I know it's true because you've tried to write one of these, haven't you? You've tried to write one in your own app and copy Taylor with varying degrees of success. There's a huge lesson in that for me. Because if I genuinely believe that it is worth spending 10 to 15 minutes to write a comment that will be ignored, then I have to believe it's worth spending 10 to 15 minutes selecting the name of a variable, 10 to 15 minutes reformatting that class so that it looks nice to other developers, 10 to 15 minutes writing a test to prove that the code I've just created works, maybe with PES v3. We learn that lesson because Laravel teaches us that programming is so much more than just writing code, and it does that with a 3-line comment. Well, if we can learn such a powerful lesson from a comment, would you not agree that in reality, every feature in this framework is a lesson? Every feature in this framework has something it can teach you and I about software development. And if we can work out, like, how do I actually get answers here? How do I learn from Laravel? If we can figure that out, then we can all upskill. So here's what I want to do for the rest of the talk. I want to discuss 2 more lessons that I've learned from Laravel. And I'm not going to be diving deep into the belly of the beast, you know? I'm not going to be uncovering hidden files and classes and functions you've never seen before. There'll be plenty of that over the next couple of days. I want to look at the code that you're so familiar with, you'd write it with your eyes closed. The code that you'd hand to ChatGPT. The code that you view as boring boilerplate. Because if we can learn lessons from boring boilerplate, you'll start seeing lessons everywhere else. And I want to start for our first lesson with the heart of every Laravel project. When I clone an existing Laravel repository, there are many files I could open, right? I could open the app service provider, composer.json, bootstrap/app.php, the Vite config file. I don't open any of those. The first file I go to is web.php. And it got me thinking, why? Why do I go to this random file in the root directory? It turns out we can learn incredible amounts of information about the purpose and architecture of an application just by looking at that one file. Let me demo that to you. I have an application here. That's not it. I have an application here that I've been putting together. And here's the deal, by the way, at this section of the talk. I'm going to be asking you some heart-searching questions. And in this little tube is an amazing piece of swag. If you can put your hand up and answer one of my questions, you put yourself in line to win that at the end of the talk. Who knows what it is? So just keep that in mind, all right? I'll give you the first one for free. We look at the first root in this web.php file. We've got our standard home root. Returns a welcome blade view. Quick peek inside there. It's the Laravel splash screen. What does that teach us about the app? Well, if we're still showing the Laravel splash screen on the landing page, we're not quite ready for prime time. It's still in development. So with that in mind, you push forward and you've got your dashboard root, again returning a blade view, but this time we have two pieces of middleware attached, auth and verified. So first question, what does auth and verified do? None of these are tricks, by the way. Please?
Auth makes sure you're logged in, you're authenticated, and verified makes sure you verified your email.
You've got it, thank you. So you have to be logged in, you have to have a verified email. What does that teach us about the app? Well, there must be a user model. There must be a users table. The users table's got an email field, an email verified app field. We've likely given thought to the email service we want to use to send that, and almost certainly we're using email as a username. Now, you might think, isn't that how Laravel's configured out of the box? Yeah, it is. But with two words in web.php, you know that there's nothing funky going on. There's no crazy custom auth system that people have tried to shove in over the top. And that gives you confidence that you're dealing with something you can control. So with that confidence, you push forward, you come to the first root group in this application, all protected by that auth middleware. Okay, you've got to be a user to see this. And you get a little bit of deja vu because you've seen these roots before, profile controller roots. Second question, what scaffolding project did I use to build this app? Please. Breeze, you've got it. Now isn't that interesting? You've not seen composer.json, you've not run composer install, and you know that this is Laravel Breeze. Perhaps in the back of your mind, you're thinking, okay, not Jetstream, we don't have session control, we don't have two-factor authentication, but we've got register and login and password reset, email verification. We have that little profile edit endpoint. I wonder which stack it's using. I can't be 100% sure, but we're returning blade, so one of the blade stacks, right? I think that's incredible. And then you push forward a little further, you come to the first real roots of the application. If you've seen any of my talks before, no surprise, it's about parrots. Whenever I see a block of roots like this, I always go to the name. Parrots.create, store, edit, update, destroy. Create, store, edit, update, destroy. I've heard of those words before as well. Anyone tell me what we're dealing with here? Please? Yeah, that's right, resource routes. We call that CRUD, right? You've got CRUD and resources. So if it's called parrots and you've got a parrot controller, you know that in the model directory there must be a parrot, and there's a database table called parrots. And seeing as we're inside this big auth group, you also know that users control that parrot resource in some way. Again, we're not digging through files to work this out. It's just there, in front of us. There are two missing endpoints here. Can anyone tell me what the two missing endpoints are? Index, that's one. Show, you've got it. Thank you very much. Index and show. I wonder where they are. We'll come back to that, because at this point, an experienced Laravel dev sees a refactor. So you can come to the top of this root group here, and you could say root resource, parrots, going to the parrot controller class. Let's make sure we exclude index and show. And then we can remove all of these manual roots here. And within 3 minutes of seeing this file, you're ready to submit your first pull request back to the application. You are productive within minutes of cloning a Laravel repository. And you go, oh, look at that. There's index and there's show. Outside of the auth group. Now we start to understand the purpose of this application. Very realistic. A public index of parrots. And as you move across to the name, you notice it's not parrots.index, it's users.parrots.index. What do we call that kind of root in Laravel? Please. You've got it, nested resource root. A nested resource root gives us information about the links between models. You haven't seen the database schema, but you know that users have many parrots, and a parrot belongs to a user. You know that on that parrots table, there's a user ID column, which is a foreign key lookup to the user.id column inside the database. This is just incredible. You can take it for granted, but it is incredible. And it gets you thinking, how is it possible? How is it possible to learn so much from one file? And you might say, well, actually, I'm a very experienced Laravel developer, been doing this stuff for decades, you know. Well done, pat yourself on the back. Good job. But if you take all the credit for this, what you actually are doing is missing the lesson Laravel's trying to teach you. So the most important thing when it comes to learning these lessons is to just take yourself out of the picture and instead say, how does Laravel make this possible? What's Laravel doing? Laravel accomplishes this very thing by being ordinary and obvious. How dare you talk about my framework that way? It's not a slur. It is the greatest compliment I could pay the framework. Laravel stands out as being ordinary and obvious among so many frameworks and packages and ideas that are trying to be clever and complex. I mean, Laravel, if you don't add all the bells and whistles, is just a PHP monolith, same as we've had for 20 years. Routing in Laravel is one example of this. Routing in Laravel has essentially remained unchanged since Laravel began. In fact, if I were to show you a Laravel 3 project, and we went to routes.php, which is what it used to be called, you would still understand all of that file. And because of that consistency over time, Laravel developers have become very fine-tuned. They understand even small changes in that file. If you see middleware like auth and verified, you know what that means for the rest of the application. If you see certain HTTP verbs or naming paradigms, you know what that means for the application. If you see popular routes from a scaffolding project, you understand what features are going to be available to you. All that is only possible because Laravel is ordinary and obvious. Now, there have been some really cool attempts to change how routing works in Laravel. Very cool community package allows you to define your routes using PHP attributes. So you jump into a controller, and above each method, you use one of those hashtag symbols that makes you feel like a Rust developer. And you drop your route name in, and you can delete web.php if you want. It's clever, it really is, and I've used it in a number of my projects. But I would avoid using it if I was working with a large team. Because what happens the next time I bring a senior Laravel developer on board? Well, they clone the repository, don't they? And they open up web.php, and then they sit there with their mouth open for a couple of minutes. And then they approach and they say, Luke, where are the routes? And I say, come sit down. See, we've been very clever here. And for the next hour and a half, what do I have to do? I have to take them through every controller and every method in every controller to give them the same basic overview they could have had in 5-10 minutes if they just had access to web.php. See, yes, I've been clever. But in being clever, what I've actually done is convoluted the whole process. So anytime I start a project, I keep the mantra in mind: be ordinary and obvious, not clever and convoluted. It will take you a long way. For our second lesson, we have to turn to the parrot show page. This is Polly, beautiful parrot. Just under the description on the right-hand side, you'll see that we can see where Polly has flown recently. These are Polly's outings. And next to each outing, we have this little satellite image. That's provided by Mapbox. And if I jump into the application itself, you'll see I have a controller for this. So it receives a latitude and longitude. We make the request, send our access token. We're going to cache that response, and then we're going to send that on to the front end. So 4 key services here, right? Response, config, HTTP, and cache. You'll note that we access all 4 of these services using a little feature Laravel provides called Facades. Now, if you ever find yourself interested in starting World War III, the fastest way to do that is to go on Twitter or Reddit, your choice, and you tell the world that you like using facades, and you will receive the worst personal insults you have ever heard. You will hear words you didn't even know existed. What's all the hate for? Well, if we're being honest, right, if we're being grown up about it, facades break a few rules. Now, we don't like to hear that as PHP developers because we've spent the last couple of decades being laughed at by people who write in languages like Node.js, right? We just don't like it. And so when people say, oh, you're breaking rules, we can squirm a little bit. But it's true, facades break rules. Think about it. Inversion of control, right? Inversion of control states that we pass our dependencies down elegantly through constructors, and yet their facades are with access to the application instance and the container instance. And when they want a dependency, they don't have it passed down to them, do they? They break through the glass ceiling, they grab that dependency, and they pull it down by force. What about the separation of concerns? The single responsibility principle? You see, most of these facades, they have testing helpers baked right onto the facade itself. You end up mixing testing code with application code. You should burn for that. So what's the solution? The solution is to get on Twitter and to tell the world that Taylor Otwell and the Laravel team are buffoons, imbeciles, idiots, who don't know what they're talking about and should be avoided at all costs. Is that what we really think? Like, do we truly believe that Taylor, Jess, Nuno, James, Joe, maybe not Joe, but the rest of them, do we really not believe they don't know what they're talking about? They're not infallible, they make mistakes, they're human like the rest of us. But come on, man. They know more about architecture patterns than I will ever know. And I teach at Laracasts, right? They're masters of their craft. And despite that fact, despite knowing that they're breaking rules, they continue to create, use, promote facades. What gives? They truly believe that the benefits to developer experience and productivity outweigh the consequence of being a little bit naughty and breaking a few rules, right? This became very obvious to me when I started writing tests using facades. Let's go back to our application. I'm going to show you this map image controller test here. You'll note right there on line 9, we go ahead and break the single responsibility principle. We go ahead and break the separation of concerns. But you know what's so nice about line 9? We break the separation of concerns. You see, I can immediately link that line to line 21 inside my controller. I know that those two things are related. I don't have to go searching through services to find that out. And so I have confidence when I start making requests to this endpoint, I'm not going to be paying mapbox. I'm not going to be hitting API limits. I can use some incredible helpers like assert sent to check in one line that we're going to the right endpoint. I could check that I'm sending the access token in the header correctly, that I'm sending the latitude and longitude parameters as I should be. I can use a facade like cache to ensure that the key is being stored as expected and that the value equals that stubbed out file from the top. And I'll tell you what we can do. Seeing as we're stubbing out that response, why don't we make 2 requests in a single test and then use the HTTP facade to ensure that that second response must have come from the cache because we only ever sent 1 out to Mapbox. These tests took 2-3 minutes to write. The majority of that time was deciding what pest descriptions to use. They're so easy to read, to understand. And if I ever have to update these down the line, if I add new functionality to this controller, it'll be a breeze. What's the lesson? The lesson is that you should know the rules. I actually learned most of the architectural principles I know today by using Laravel. Laravel doesn't teach you should avoid the rules. No, it's your professional responsibility to understand rules. You should know what solid means. You should know why we have a separation of concerns. And for goodness sake, yes, if you put 20 different facades in one eloquent helper method, it's going to cause issues down the line. That's just really bad coding. But once you know the rules, then you should know when to break them. And that usually boils down to whether the developer experience and productivity outweigh the consequence of being naughty. If you want an application of where this comes up in everyday life, it would be in embracing the Laravel framework. Because if you think about it, every time you embrace the Laravel framework, you're breaking rules, right? If you follow solid, you'll know that you have a boundary layer between anything you write and anything the framework does. So you would never put application logic in a controller. You would never use collections directly. You would never use stringables directly. You would have an interface boundary layer. Every time you choose not to do that, you break rules. What's the benefit? The benefit is that your developer experience and productivity goes up. You're not having to worry about that extra layer, so you're faster as a result. But there is a consequence. The consequence is that it makes it difficult to move away from the Laravel framework, especially if you use features like Facades. You're kind of stuck in the Laravel framework. So you have to weigh it up. Is it really worth it? Let's do some maths. I think there are 900 people, right? 900 people in attendance. Let's say we've all created 10 Laravel projects. I think we've created many more. We'll be conservative, we'll say 10. That's 9,000 projects all in all. Now, show of hands, how many of you have legitimately had to move away from the Laravel framework to another PHP framework, not to another language, to another PHP framework? Just one more time? Right, just the 2 guys then. 3 guys. Just the 3 guys. Right? So what you say when you refuse to embrace the framework is that you truly believe you are the Goldilocks snowflake 3 in 9,000 project that is going to have to move away from Laravel to another PHP framework. Because if you need to move to another language, which does happen from time to time, PHP can't do everything, guess what? You've got to rewrite all the app code anyway. So you've saved yourself nothing by refusing to embrace the framework. All you've actually done is negatively impacted your developer experience and your productivity. So such an important lesson, and it's helped me so much to know the rules, but don't just follow them because some guy on the internet said they were important one day. Instead, once you understand the rules, know when to break them. Friends, in 25 minutes, we've discussed just 2 lessons that Laravel teaches, but as I said at the start of the talk, every feature in this framework is a lesson. Every feature has something it can teach you and I about software development. And now we know the key to unlocking that knowledge. First of all, take yourself out of the picture. You're not important. Slow down, and then ask questions. Questions like, why does Laravel include Symfony components? Why does Laravel default to a SQLite database? Why is Laravel prompts framework agnostic? Why were so many files removed in Laravel 11? If you search for the answers to those questions, you are guaranteed to learn something. Because if you think about it, behind every single one of these features we've been talking about, there are thousands of extremely talented open source developers with decades of experience. And they have laid all that knowledge on the table for you for free if you just learn the lessons from the Laravel framework. Well, that went really fast. But I don't want to finish on a bit of a, he talked to us about lessons for 25 minutes. So I want to do something fun. I said about the swag. So here's the deal. If you answered one of my questions, were there like 5 or 6 of you, I'm going to ask you to do something no developer wants to do. Come just here to the front of the stage, right? Don't be shy, just do it, all right? All right, a little bit of backstory. If you've seen any of my recent videos, you'll have seen this guy. This is Larry. He's the mascot for Laracasts. He's a cool guy. Jeffrey actually has a couple of cameras in his eyes. He uses it to keep track of me at work. Anyway, it's a very nice poster, like 45, 50 pounds, which, what's that, 300, 400 US dollars or something? Not quite sure on the conversion rates there. I didn't just buy one Larry, I bought 2 Larrys. So in this tube is another Larry poster, super high quality Larry poster for your wall. But I only have one. So we're going to have a fight to the death. However, turns out insurance doesn't quite cover that. So have you got your phones? Has someone got someone to stand in with a phone just here maybe? Is that okay? And have you got internet? That's the other important question. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to scan this QR code for me. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to run over here real quick. Give you one last look at this. And then open. Oh, wow. Are we not connected to the network? I can be. It's supposed to be an Ethernet cable, but... There we go, let's try that again. Oh, no. Well, isn't this awkward? Hey, there we go. Happy days. Okay. So, I'm going to ask you to scan this QR code for me.
Are we playing Snake?
You go. Who knows? There we go. You open that one?
Yes, sir.
You grab that one for me? So you may have seen recently on Laracasts, I released a course all about real-time games using Laravel, which was incredibly fun to make. And I thought, why don't we take that and do something pretty cool to determine who's going to win this prize. So you can see our 5 players have loaded in. I'm going to get the game started. You should know exactly what you're doing based on what's happening in your hands. And then I'll explain what on earth is going on here. Are we ready? Okay, so each player is holding a directional pad, right? And when they click a direction in that directional pad... You want one more go at that? One more go?
Yeah.
I feel like that will happen very quickly. I'll give you one last chance. When they click a direction on that directional pad, we are using WebSockets and Laravel Echo to broadcast a direction change for them. That goes up to a server, it's then broadcast back down, and we're able to see that on my MacBook as a direction change, right? This happens so fast that you can actually have a game on ridiculously bad Wi-Fi where you can play in real time. And this is using Laravel. This took me 4 hours to build in one evening when I was having a little bit of fun, which I think speaks to the, there we go, which I think speaks to the productivity that Laravel provides. Now, here we go. This is the poster. I also got you like these pens, which almost cost as much as the poster. It's ridiculous. But I thought if you wanted to get some signatures on the poster or whatever, do what you'd like. Can we give a round of applause to our volunteers? Folks, I want to say thank you so much. Can't wait to meet as many of you as possible and have a fantastic 2 days at Laracon. Thank you.
Nicely done. Well done. Is that game open source? Are we going to get to play that?
We can. I mean, if anyone wants to settle any differences as well, just come up to me during the conference and
Yeah,
we'll have a game.
I like that. And that's the nicest British accent saying fight to the death I've ever heard. So I very much appreciated that. Okay, one question. The parrots.
Yes.
Last year was parrots.
Yep.
This year's parrots.
Yes.
What's with the parrots?
I don't know. I don't really like birds. I just think they're funny. And
Okay.
they can talk a little bit and they poo a lot. So, you know.
They can talk and they can poo. Everybody, Luke Downing.